Welcome to 101. I'm Greg Bassett, your host from the Salisbury Independent newspaper. We've got one of my favorite people in the house. You talk about public service. This woman does it. Christine Chestnutt from the city of Salisbury. Welcome, Christine.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me.
Now, you are the manager for housing and
homelessness
in Salisbury. And everyone thinks they know your job. They think they know all about homelessness. They all think they have the solution to it. But the reality is none of us really know anything.
It's really difficult to know until you work with the homeless community, and then you begin to understand a little bit more about public perception and what we all, even myself included, thought the homeless community needed or what the issues were. And until you work with them, you really don't know. Exactly.
The wiring is not the same as the lifestyle that you grew up in.
Right.
And you experience this every day.
We do. There's often people who don't work in homelessness say, why can't they just get a job? Why can't they just do these things? Why can't they, whatever the thing is, apply for benefits? Why can't they do that? Well, when you're street homeless and so you might need food, you might need benefits from the VA, you might need whatever. That's hard to do if you don't have a phone and access to the internet, and if you don't have a mailing address. For example, getting a P.O. box sounds easy, but you have to pay for that.
Right.
And two, most agencies that require you to have an address do not accept the P.O. box as an address.
Exactly.
So you have to have a physical address, which that leaves out all the homeless people. So we do have a P.O. box that the homeless community can use, but it comes with a street address. It's kind of a bizarre thing, but that we allow them to use because they don't have another place to get mail. And sometimes they'll get mail at a family member's house or a friend, but then if that ends up not going well, then they're still not getting their mail. So it's a challenge for sure.
And one of the other things in Salisbury that people don't know is there are people who are housed in different community programs. So they have housing, but during the day, even if they're in a shelter, even during the day, they are supposed to go out and do stuff. So you see people kind of wandering around, and people immediately think that they're homeless, but they're not.
Right. So there's several different programs that provide housing for formerly homeless, those with mental illness, different things, including those with addiction. So Go-Getters provides that housing. The Wycombe County Health Department has housing. We have housing. There's other agencies that provide that support. But you see people out just walking around all day, and you assume that they're homeless because they spend a majority of their time outside. I think the reason for that is because that's where they were used to being, and it's hard often for people to just rest and stay inside. They're so used to being outdoors. So there's a huge stigma about people that are just walking around, and we get lots of calls about that. They're homeless. I'm like, actually, they're not. They're housed. The same is true for panhandlers. Most often, we get many, many calls from the community or whoever. There's a person panhandling at this corner. And we've almost always already conversated with those people. And although people think they are homeless, almost all of them are not. They are suffering from addiction. So they're standing there panhandling to get money for addiction. How you know for sure is give them food. Someone that is street homeless will always take food even if they just stick it in their backpack. Someone that is not, I've had food thrown back at me. So they won't take food because that's not what they're there for, So I do have a couple guys that panhandle that are homeless. You'll get a couple of them that have been around for years and years. You'll see them. But most, I would say 95% of the people that panhandle are not homeless. But it appears that way, because why else would you stand outside if you didn't have to? You'll often see girls panhandling. They get more sympathy. They get more money. But there's a man that's encouraging them to do that. I watched the other day someone who I'd already spoken to, a female. She told me she wasn't homeless. She lives in an apartment. She tried telling me she was panhandling to get money to go to work. Well, that was great for 1 week, but this has been an everyday thing, so I knew it was different than that. And I was sitting in a restaurant, and I watched her husband, boyfriend, whatever he was, come across, take the backpack from her and give her a fresh backpack so she could continue to collect money. So it's an addiction. It's an addiction problem, and that's a whole different thing. Usually if they're panhandling, they're not interested in getting help for the addiction. That's something that we do, is get them connected to services. But if they're not interested, they're not interested. I've had business cards thrown back at us. They throw them on the ground with us standing there. They, throw the food back at us, whatever. So that's a challenge, because the stigma of homelessness, so those people who might be aggressive, walking up to your car, that kind of thing, people think they're homeless. So then they think all homeless people are that way.
Right.
But that's really not what's happening. It's really usually an addiction.
Right, and one thing I've learned with homeless people or challenged people, certainly, they all have a story, and their stories are not necessarily the same story. They're not all evil. They're not
No.
all addicts.
No.
Most of them are certainly have some sort of an emotional problem or mental problem.
Yeah.
And they just need help. They need the right kind of encouragement.
So a lot of the homeless community that we work with, almost all of them, I would say, have had serious trauma in their life. Often it started in childhood and continued on, whether it was they were homeless as children and that has just kind of continued, or whether it was abuse or neglect or drug use by the parents or whatever the thing is. There's incredible stories of just awful, awful things that they have experienced. And so if you don't have that support system in your family to figure out how to get help for those things, then that can often lead to addiction because you're trying to do that yourself. You don't know how to, you've never been given the skills to figure out how to get help. So a lot of our guys and women work a job every day. They live outside, they work a job, or they have income because they may have a disability that's too severe to carry a job the way that you and I would carry a job. So it's not that they're just sitting around not working. There's some of the clients that we work with are completely unable to work. And it may seem that way. You see them sitting on a park bench. Well, why can't they work? But there's a lot more going on than what you see. So there is, like I said, there's a bunch of the people that hold jobs. They work jobs every day. But it's just the challenges of they're living moment to moment. They're living in fight or flight mode constantly. So their focus is, where am I going to sleep tonight? Where am I getting my next meal from? So you don't have a chance to think about, like, my children could say, oh, well, I'm planning for the future. I can save money. I can do these things. They don't have time for that. They're literally living moment to moment, trying to figure out how they can be safe, how they can get food, those kinds of things. So it's not as simple as just going and getting a job or doing the things.
Yeah.
But a bunch of them do work, they just do. But it's often, almost always, the ones who've been outside a long time, it's almost always trauma. That's where the thing started, was just incredible trauma. I've had someone with a PhD that was living outdoors. I've had several people with master's degrees living outdoors. And in all those situations, it was just life happened to them. Something traumatic happened, and then it snowballed into being street homeless. And usually in a relatively quickly period of time, a year or two, like a short time. I had a lady who lost her only son to an overdose. And she carried this guilt that if she had let him stay at home, he wouldn't have died, which maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, I don't know. But that was her only child, and she had a master's degree in nursing. And when I met her, she was living in a little patch of trees, so distraught she just continued to wring her hands and just beside herself, couldn't even get the words out that she wanted to say. And she finally told me that that's what happened to her. Her son overdosed. He had been using and clean off and on for a long time. She was so depressed she couldn't go to work, and she was a nurse, and she knew that there were resources, but she just stayed in bed, and then she lost her job because you have to go to work, and then she began drinking as a way to, help herself, which she intelligently knew that was not the thing to do, but that's what, at that moment, that's what she did. And within 2 years, she was street homeless, just had lost everything because of it. And so as a mom, when you think about that, losing your child, like, that's traumatic. No matter whether you have one child or 10, that's a very traumatic thing. And she just didn't either seek out the resources or didn't know what to do in that moment. She was so traumatized, and she was street homeless. She's housed now. We helped her get into a place, but it's, that trauma stays with her. So it's challenging for sure.
I couldn't understand the definition of your job, but I've watched you do your job now for years, and it's amazing that you know all these people. You have professional and personal relationships with them.
Yeah.
You wrote an amazing column that we ran in the paper about this woman, Angie, what her plight was, what her life was like. It was obvious that her existence really touched you on a very special level.
It did.
So I guess my question is, how did you get into this?
It is overwhelming. So I'll backtrack a little. Back in probably 2008, I was attending Oak Ridge Baptist Church, and Celeste from Halo was also a member of the church, and she started talking about getting people to volunteer in homelessness. And I was like, oh, that's something I think would be interesting.
The work Halo does is just incredible.
It is.
Go ahead, yeah.
It is. So I had never been around homeless people. I don't know, I just felt like that was something that I needed to do. So Celeste and I would go, she did this with many people. We would bring hot meals to the church. We would go out afterwards and just literally street outreach, feed people on the streets. That's what we did. We did that for a while. And then that's before Halo was open. She was working towards that. So we would do that. And then when she opened Halo, I would go in the kitchen and serve on Sundays to help feed the homeless population. But back then there weren't paying jobs in homelessness. It was all volunteer work. And I remember very specifically saying, like, if I could ever find a job paying, this is what the job that I would be doing. So fast forward many years, that was, like I said, probably around 2008, 2009. Fast forward, I was working for the Salisbury Police Department as a civilian, doing, community work there as well, just on a different level. And this job came up with the city. And as soon as I saw it, I knew that it was the job that I was supposed to have. I applied. Theo, who used to be in my position, hired me, and we've just moving forward ever since.
That's really amazing. Now, when you go home at night, what's been a good day? What's been a bad day?
Good days are when you can move someone into housing, when you can get a mom and her kids off the streets. Bad days are when it's just been, when you feel like you're just putting out fires constantly, and you have to decide which fire is the most important to put out, and they're all important.
Right.
And you're trying to do so with a fire extinguisher instead of a fire hose,
Right.
So, and then when you lose someone, that's the most devastating day.
When Angie pops up dead, I mean, that's not good.
No. So we've been helping Angie since the very beginning, even when Theo was here before I started. We got her into housing down in Somerset County. She stayed for 2 years, and then she left. It's just, people that have been street homeless a long time have a hard time being inside.
Yeah.
So she had just come back to Wicomico probably 4 months or so before she passed. We were in Texas visiting the Community First Village, which is a tiny home village out there.
Which we'll talk about, yeah.
Yeah, and I got a message from someone who used to be homeless, who is in my housing program, and he said, "Hey, can you find out if I heard Angie passed away?" And I was like, I didn't know. So I contacted someone that I know that works in our hot team at the hospital, and he said that she in fact had passed away. So we worked, that was a challenge. They didn't have a family contact. The police didn't have anybody to contact for her. I knew that she had children that she did not raise, but she had 2 children. I contacted her daughter, let her daughter know. She had never met her daughter. She had never had the chance to meet her. She had been adopted by other people, which was a good thing.
Yeah.
Angie was street homeless a long time, so that would have not been a good place to have children. We were able to make contact with her daughter, and Angie had adoptive parents when she was young in foster care. We worked with them. They paid for her cremation. I went to Baltimore, picked up her ashes, brought them back, and was able to give them to her daughter, which was not how I would have liked for her daughter to get to know more about her.
Right.
But it was an opportunity for us to say, hey, we've been working with her for a long time, and I know that she has burnt bridges in her life. I understand that, but with us, that was not, we have a different relationship with her. So I was able to provide her family pictures, and then her foster family provided pictures, and it got actually some of Angie's family back together. Her sister as well was contacted, and I didn't even know she had a sister. I didn't know. So, but it's really hard. So in 2019, we didn't lose anybody outside. That's incredible. That's our whole goal. But from March of 2020 until now, August of this year, we've lost 10 people outside. There's a lot of reasons for that. One, there weren't shelter beds for those who would have gone to shelter.
Right.
The shelters weren't taking people.
Right.
And still are not. It's, they're worried about COVID. And, the homeless is a very vulnerable population. So we understand. And some of them just would have never gone to shelter. Angie was one. She lived outside a long time.
There are a lot of rules at the shelter.
There are rules. And when you're used to living by your own set of rules, that's a hard thing. Sometimes we get complaints that, it feels like jail because they're telling you when you get up, when you go to bed, when you eat. So for people who have spent a long time in incarceration, that's difficult. They would prefer to be outside. And there's good reasons for rules. There has to be some structure, but not everybody likes to follow those rules. So, and it seems like you would just say, well, why don't you just go to the shelter? Well, it's just not that easy. It's just not. So, but We have a lot of good days, but we have to celebrate the small victories. You know, not every day we're moving somebody into housing. So,
What's the statistic? How many homeless people are there right now in Salisbury? Any idea?
I don't know about how many people are in shelter. I'm not sure about that. You know, they do that point in time. We do a point in time count every year in January, and that's where HUD makes us literally count homeless people. The shelter people are always counted. The outside people, that's our job to find them and count them. The problem is that's not an accurate number because they make us do it in January. So when it's really cold outside, often family will take people in as a temporary basis. But
Right.
as soon as the weather gets warm, they're like,
They
get
kick
out.
them out, yeah.
So if the pit count was done in June or July, we would have a lot more people. But I know right now in just what Joe and I, the work that we do, we have between 65 and 70 people outdoors right now. In a pre-COVID time, it was about 25. So we have seen a significant increase, and every single day we go out, we meet somebody that we didn't know before, whether they're coming out of incarceration or whether they've been evicted now because the eviction moratorium was lifted, or whether because they just were staying with someone and someone says, get out. Just 2 days ago, we met 3 people we'd never seen before. So they were literally outside, sleeping outside. So it's a challenge. There's a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's interesting. These homeless camps are all over Salisbury, and people don't know they're there. I know there were people kind of in the woods there behind the rural farms in downtown Salisbury, under the billboards, along the train tracks. You know, I would see people in there, riding my bike through there and see that.
Yeah.
One time I was looking for the old Catholic cemetery behind the 7-Eleven over by Nanticoke Road, and walked into a homeless camp. And I was in it before I realized it because it was so completely invisible. And there were a lot of people there. There were probably 15 people,
Yeah.
you know, and they all saw me as a threat, not some goofball looking for an old cemetery stone. But you could tell there was like a community there, and they all knew each other, and they were relying on each other, and they had some stuff going on together. I mean, it was really different than what you imagine in terms of homelessness.
Yeah. So one of the jobs that Joe and I have is we do street outreach, and what that looks like is literally going to where the people are and trying to get them connected to services. So some days you'll just see us parked along the side of a wood somewhere, and we're going in there to see if somebody's in there. You know, we're trying to get them connected. We have 2 of our largest homeless camps were a few months ago closed. Property owners came in and said, you have to go, you know, you have to move from here. It just displaced them to other places, you know, they're still outside. We have people outside in Delmar. So we serve, although I work for the city, we serve the entire county, Wycomico County as a whole. So we have people outside in Delmar. We have people outside in Fruitland. We have majority are just outside the city limits of Salisbury, but still in Salisbury, because technically you're not allowed to camp in the city. But sometimes they do. You know, my job is to get them connected to services. My job is not to move them from where they are. That's somebody else's job. But we try really hard to locate new people, and you'll see us in the woods, coming out of the woods. Yeah. Sometimes businesses are calling the mayor's office, going, "What is happening? Why are they in the why is the city in the woods over here?" But that's what our job is. Our job is to go in. We cover ourselves in bug spray and go in and try to figure out. There's specific things to look for when you're looking for a homeless camp. You know, so we know what to look for and well-worn paths is one of them. You know, you see a well-worn path, and it could be a deer path. Sometimes that's what we come across. Sometimes it's just because four-wheelers ride in there, and they've well-worn a path. But sometimes it's because there's people in there. So they're a little bit of everywhere. We do have quite a few people in tents.
Wow. The mayor just last week announced a new housing initiative. There's lots of elements to this. One thing is the tiny houses that you mentioned earlier that you went to see in Texas. I'm very intrigued by that. I just think that's so cool. But talk about what is happening next.
So for a long time, I've been trying to research better options than what we're doing. So currently we have a permanent supportive housing program where we just use private landlords or landlords throughout the city. The client pays 30% of their income in rent, and the city pays the remainder. We also get some HUD funding for that as well. It's kind of a conglomerate effort.
So it's putting people in apartments or rooms somewhere.
So out of the streets and into housing.
Right.
But they don't make enough to do that on their own. But it's costly. It's very costly. So I've been trying to figure out a way to reduce some of that cost. And so tiny homes, really, I've been researching that for a long time. the startup is incredible. It's, you know, if you have to acquire land and build infrastructure, that's a huge thing. But the homes themselves are, like the ones in Austin, Texas, are they are paid for before they're built. So you get sponsorships, corporate sponsorships, businesses, private people, whoever, and then the client pays like 30% of their income in rent. But then you don't require any match because they're already paid for. So their income goes towards the ongoing cost of upkeep and electricity, that kind of thing. But there's no match, and then the person can stay there forever. It's permanent housing. So, for example, now so we could build a tiny home. Realistically, for about $15,000 to $20,000 for one home. Right now, I am paying for one client to live for 1 year. I'm paying $12,000. So if you put two clients together that I'm housing for 1 year, I could pay for a house for somebody forever.
Right.
So when you look at it that way, it really is, and it does give some. It provides an opportunity to house more people, and it gives them dignity and hope, and just to kind of give them a chance to get off the streets. So what we're doing initially is, so the tiny home village like Austin has is my ultimate goal. That's where I want to be, but it's a huge undertaking. So we're starting with, they're called pallet shelters. Now I know that name is very deceiving. They are not made out of pallets. We're not putting people in pallets, but it's palletshelter.com. You can check it out. They are actually 8x8 fiberglass structures. So we're starting with those. They don't have bathrooms or kitchens or anything.
Yeah, you
in
have
them.
a common area for a bathroom and
Right.
for eating.
So, but they have heating and air conditioning. So we won't lose people to heat-related or cold-related illnesses. And it gives them, you put them in a community. So it looks like a neighborhood, you know, where they can interact with each other, those kinds of things. And it just gives them a safe place to sleep where, like I was talking before, how they're in fight or flight mode constantly. This gives them a place they can go in and lock the door and just rest. They will be safe. Their belongings will be safe. You know, if you walk around town now, you'll find people's belongings that have been left. They've had to go to work, whatever. And then those things get thrown away. And then we have to work hard again to get them all the things that we had already spent time getting them.
Right.
So this would give them a place to keep their belongings, a place to be until we can get them into permanent housing. Right now, because there's hardly any housing available and the rent is incredible at this point, they need a longer term place to stay, because what we're doing now is we move them from streets to housing. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. Again, one is that they've not been used to being indoors. So they have to acclimate to that. You know, you'll have people that turn the air conditioning all the way down and leave the windows all the way open. Well, you know, that's because they don't know. They just hadn't had that structure. So giving them a chance to be indoors in a smaller setting before we can get them into permanent housing is also going to help with the transition from being outside into a regular place. But ultimately, I want what Austin, Texas has. They have a much more incredible homeless population than we have. We don't need what they have. But they started with 5 acres. They now have 58 acres, and they're expanding. While we were there, they've already started phase 3 and phase 4, and I think that's going to be like 119 acres when they're done. It was incredible to watch. It was incredible to see. If you look at Community First Austin, Texas, you Google that. They have different types of homes. They started with RVs. It was a very simple.
Yeah.
You know, they've got kitchens and bathrooms and electricity, and then they have moved. They still have RVs, but then they also have what I call tiny homes that have kitchens and bathrooms. But then they have these other little buildings that have. They might have been 12 by 12 foot beds, heating, air conditioning, all that, but they don't have bathrooms and kitchens. But in Austin, they have community kitchens and community bathrooms that were beautiful. But the community kitchen, that won't work here as well because Austin's weather is a lot better than ours year round.
Yeah.
So the cold weather doesn't allow us to have, you know, outdoor kitchens the way that they do. But there's still, you could still have a community kitchen that's just not outdoors. You know, you could put it inside of a building, but it's the way, it's where we have to transition to. We have to do different than what we're doing, because what COVID has done is shined a huge spotlight on all the things that are wrong in homelessness, and not just, it's every agency, there's no one to blame, it's just the way that things are. So we've got to do something different, and I try to think very progressively in how we can change things, and so that's what I definitely want here.
Well, one thing I saw when COVID first started, and you guys built the little tent city over there on the west side, to kind of contain the COVID situation and get everybody together rather than moving COVID all around. and it got weathered out in the end. But you could tell that people had no hope when they were living in the woods, but being in a community sort of gave them this, like a hopeful mission, like it kind of changed some attitudes there.
Yeah, so we knew that, Governor Hogan put us in a shelter in place, and I was like, well, the homeless have no place to shelter in place. Emergency shelters are closed, or, not open, not taking new people. And so we had to do something, and I was doing some research at the time to try to figure out what other agencies were doing. Some places like Baltimore City purchased a whole hotel and just put people in there. That's super expensive. And other places were just putting up tents, So we did that. It was April, so the weather here was not great. It lasted, but we had people there that, they kind of all know each other one way or the other on the streets anyway. But we had guys that were just every day, they would empty the trash for us and go put it in the dumpster, so we didn't have to do it. They were helping us carry food that was being donated and carry drinks that were being donated. They took a sense of pride in that being their place to be, until we had that nor'easter and it blew all my tents down.
But also with it being visible, people could see the problem, and you got great donations from people who wanted to help.
We did. We were not welcomed at first.
Yeah.
We had a lot of angry people. I understand. That tends to just be how it is. But in the end, I had not one complaint from the neighborhood that we were in, not one. We were able to use our social media to say, hey, we need breakfast foods, we need whatever. It was very easy for people to come and drop donations off, and people were riding by going, what is this? What is happening?
Right.
And asking questions, and we were able to educate them on what was happening. So it's often challenging for people in a community to say, I don't want, it's literally called NIMBY, not in my backyard.
Right.
And I get it, I understand, but at the same time, we had to do something, and that was our solution. Those people moved on to hotel stays temporarily as some funding came through, or they were able to be with family or get in some other kind of housing. But we had to do something.
Christine Chestnutt, we admire what you do so much.
Thank
How
you.
can people get a hold of you if they want to help?
So the best way is probably through email. It's cchestnut@salisbury.md.
2 T's.
2 T's on the end. That's probably the best way. My phone numbers, my cell phone number's out there. That's 443-397-2149. I am often not in my office, so I don't give my office phone number too much because people get frustrated they don't answer the phone. But the nature of my job is to not be sitting at my desk.
Right.
So I often, that phone, we don't get to that one as often. But yeah, once the tiny home thing happens, we're going right through now, covering the back end of things through legislation and that kind of stuff. Once it starts happening, we're going to be needing volunteers for that. We're also, right now, we got a free pantry from a Girl Scout Troop 86 out behind our office. We're going to be looking for people to help fill that for those who don't have access to food regularly. There's always ways that you can help. Donations that we look for. We partner with Beyond Your Walls, who has a mobile shower.
Right.
And so we serve the same people. So, we work with them very closely. So, yeah, there's lots of ways that people can just get up with us and we'll find out a way for people to help out.
She's Christine Chestnutt. She's, rubber meets the road. She's right involved in everything that goes on in Salisbury and helping the homeless population. Thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm Greg Bassett from the Salisbury Independent Newspaper, another edition of 101 right here on PAC 14.
First Shore Federal is proud to support PAC 14 and one-on-one. We'd encourage every business to support PAC 14 and pick a program and support it, and let's make a difference.